Thank you, Laskin Corda. I'm sharing time with Deputy Bruin. Thank you.
Agreed.
Laskin Corda, the primary purpose of the bill is to address the remaining legislative barriers to Ireland's ratification of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The bill has been widely accepted and is quite a straightforward bill. It deals with the issues of capacity to serve as a juror, the removal of references to unsound mind for persons standing for election. It provides for the Department of Justice as the focal point for implementation of the Convention, and the issue of reasonable accommodation costs and the deprivation of liberty, among others. These relatively achievable goals are not without problems, however, which I will go into in more details later, but for now I want to make the point that the Government has had 10 years to get the wording, drafting and consultative process right for this bill, which is why I find it difficult to understand how this bill is still incomplete, with the Government proposing to introduce a swathe of amendments at committee stage. Didn't we see this before with Minister Coveney's rental bill? In fact, that was at report stage, which rendered the bill unrecognisable. But most worrying of all, it left a democratic deficit in this dull chamber, as many on the inside of the House could not analyse or decipher the bill before it was pushed through into law. I also have to ask, for such a mediocre bill, why it has taken 10 years for this legislation to come forward. Last month I raised during Leaders' Questions the personal hardship the lack of ratification has caused for people like Frank Larkin, a local Donegal disability activist. I read out his letter, which highlighted the frustration he has carried during this long wait. I think for people like Frank, they deserve nothing less than a completed, tightly written piece of legislation that brings together all the loose ends blocking any process of ratification. I want to repeat some of the concerns that many advocacy groups on disability have in relation to this bill. One curious change was the removal of equality from the bill from its original general scheme. I think the word equality should be reinstated, as the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission has advised, in order to recognise the wide-ranging aspects of the UN CRPD, including the protection of transgender individuals from discrimination. While the Disability Miscellaneous Provisions Bill aims to fix most of the outstanding obstacles to the ratification of the CRPD, many issues remain outstanding. Firstly, as I've already said, the bill is incomplete. Amendments dealing with Article 14, which upholds a person's right not to be deprived of their liberty unlawfully or arbitrarily, won't be introduced until committee stage. Yet how will those living with disabilities be able to give their perspective on this bill if it remains so incomplete? What are the reasons for delay in publishing these amendments? Is it so that you can say that you are in fact doing something, however half-hearted it is? The Government needs to come clean on any reservations it may have on disability legislation in general. Some discriminatory language still persists in our legislation, and this bill was an opportunity to repeal or replace outdated and offensive terminology. The term of unsound mind was only recently used in the Companies Act 2014, and the bill was supposed to amend these terms across all legislative pieces, but this has not been done. Will the Minister commit to the removal of discriminatory language in our legislation in the near future to coincide with the ratification and implementation of the UN CRPD? And perhaps the Minister might address that in a summing up on the second stage. The bill does not address the outstanding issue in relation to a person being found in the District Court to be unfit to plead guilty because they lack decision-making capacity, and where their case is referred to a higher court which will have a harsher sentencing regime. In 2010, the High Court found that this caused a constitutional issue for people with disabilities, who become subject to a harsher sentencing regime just because they have a disability. This has not been resolved by the proposed new bill. Again, I need to ask the Minister why this has not been dealt with in the text of this bill. The bill recognises that people who are deaf should not be excluded from participation in a jury simply because they need the support of an Irish Sign Language interpreter. Reasonable accommodation should also be extended to people with other disabilities. Section 1B amends the 1976 Juries Act provisions in relation to ineligible people by relating ineligibility to capacity rather than disability. This doesn't go far enough. It would be more appropriate to create a system which would find a person ineligible for jury duty if he or she does not, in the opinion of the court, have the ability to perform the functions required of a juror following the provision of reasonable accommodation. We still have a while to go before we ratify the UN CRPD. For instance, the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Bill is in place but has not yet been commenced. In the Dáil on the 26th of January, Minister McGrath suggested that the Act would need to be commenced before ratification. This is of concern because there is a great deal of work to be done to prepare for this new, wide-ranging legislation which fundamentally reforms how people are supported to make decisions. Oversight for the implementation of the UN CRPD is given to the Department of Justice. However, this has not been put on a statutory footing. Furthermore, the UN CRPD recommends that the focal point be placed at the heart of government, such as the Prime Minister's office or the Cabinet. In this case, the Taoiseach's department, to ensure cross-departmental collaboration and leadership is met on the task. Furthermore, it is imperative that the remit of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission is expanded to include a truly independent capacity with a clear link to the designation of the Commission as the independent mechanism under Article 33 of the CRPD. The bill does not explicitly imply the remit for both the Department of Justice and the Commission beyond their administrative duties. I think this could be so easily addressed, so I wonder why this, like many other small but important changes to legislation, have not been carried out in this bill. The significant role of people with disabilities in the monitoring and evaluation process of the UN CRPD cannot be understated. It's not just vitally important, it's a requirement in the UN Convention. Article 33.3 of the UN Convention sets out the requirement to involve people with a disability in the monitoring process. Civil society, in particular persons with disabilities and their representative organisations, shall be involved and participate fully in the monitoring process, the article says. The Minister must outline to people how those with lived experience will in fact be resourced and facilitated to play a crucial role in monitoring the implementation of the UN CRPD in Ireland, and that they will continue to be key constituents in the monitoring of the Convention into the future. And I think that's vitally important. Overall, my concerns are that this bill is incomplete and may have been published prematurely to make it look like the government has been doing something on the ratification of the UN Convention. I am also concerned that when amendments to the bill come at committee stage, we could be waiting a long time for the bill to progress and therefore lose another year at least before ratification can begin. After 10 years of waiting already, how do you justify another length of time passing before the proper ratification and implementation of the UN CRPD is carried out? I think this discussion provides an opportunity for the Minister to speak out on the real reasons why ratification has been so slow in this country and how cost has always been the key issue for Fine Gael. But Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have never factored in the physical, financial and emotional cost placed on people with disabilities due to the burden placed on them because ratification has never happened. It's time the government factored these types of costs in. Minister, to factor this in and recognise that ratification of this vitally important convention will benefit all citizens in this country as it emphasises principles of equality in this country even further. Thank you.